Thanks for joining us on the Future Food Show. On this episode, we're excited to welcome Robert Yaman back to the show. Robert Yaman is the founder of Innovate Animal Ag, a new organization supporting technology that improves animal health and welfare. They're focusing on what we call in ovo egg sexing technology, which we'll dive into a little bit deeper on the show. I had a great chat with Robert and learned a lot about the future of animal agriculture. Robert, I'd like to welcome you back to the Future Food Show.
Thanks. Excited to be back on the show.
Robert, tell us a little bit about your background, especially what you've been doing in the cell ag industry over the last couple of years.
Yeah, so I've been working in cultivated meat since 2017. So kind of in the early days before it was as big as it was now. And most recently, I was running operations at Mission Barns, which is a cultivated meat company focusing on fat and then using that as a food ingredient for plant-based meat. And I actually left that job back in December to work on this new nonprofit that I'll talk more about, which is called Innovate Animal Ag.
Awesome. And I think, when we have conversations, especially about the work that you do or kind of the work in this industry in general, it's very kind of passion fueled. Can you tell us a little bit about, I guess, your passions and motivations and, where those come from?
Totally. So, I've always been really passionate about animals and animal welfare. And that's what initially drew me to working in cultivated meat in the first place. And, that was kind of one of my big motivators. And, when I left Mission Barns back in December, I spent a lot of time exploring what to do, doing a bunch of reading and thinking about a lot of things. And some of the things that were really sticking out to me and I became kind of obsessed with were these polls that you see when you ask people about their opinions and thoughts about the welfare of animals on farms. And what you find is that the data really shows that people really care about the welfare of animals on farms. One poll I read said, for example, that like half of Americans would support I would support banning factory farms, and that result really stuck out to me. And the more of it dug into it and tried to understand the data and the phenomenon behind this data, I think it's probably not literally the case that people actually support this, but I do think it points to some underlying thing that ends up being very reproducible and very common whenever in the literature when you study this thing. 70% ish of people often report being uncomfortable with certain practices in farming. Around half of people think that animals are treated well on farms, and pretty much everybody believes that they are, can feel pain and deserve a good life. And so when I was reading about these polls, I found myself being constantly surprised by them, which I felt was maybe a bad sign, given that there's such an important issue for me. And so the more I try to understand them, it really changed my perspective. And I realized that there's just a lot of appetite for making sure animals have good lives on farms, and for a lot of people, it's just a no-brainer. So this is kind of what led me to start Innovate Animal Ag, because basically our approach is to support new agricultural technologies that will have a direct impact on animal health and welfare on farms. And the rationale for this is these concerns that people report with the way that animals live on farms is something that's very business relevant, right? Like if you're an agricultural producer and such a large percentage of your consumers have concerns with some of your practices, that's something to pay attention to. And at the same time, businesses can really, differentiate, elevate their brand by improving their practices and talking about the way that they're ensuring that the animals in that they're under their stewardship are treated well and have good lives. So I became really excited about this idea, and one of the main ways that producers can improve welfare is through technology, which is kind of what my background was, having spent so much time working on alternative proteins and cultivated meat. And one of the things that was really exciting to me originally about cultivated meat, and it's still a big motivator for me, is that technology can really be, it can align incentives. Consumers want to make sure that animals have good lives on farms. Producers have an incentive to meet consumers where they are, and then when they do that, obviously it's also a win for animals because they have better lives. So that's what kind of led me to starting Innovate Animal Ag. It seemed like a very neglected approach. I didn't see a lot of folks really trying to help agricultural producers improve practices, especially through technology. Yeah, I took a lot of inspiration from it was Temple Grandin. I think she's someone who's had a huge impact on animals, and she has, I think, a lot of respect from the industry because and I think she's been able to have get a lot of respect and have a great reputation in industry because she has such a collaborative and open and supportive approach, trying to help producers treat animals better. So she's someone who I really kind of am modeling our approach after.
Interesting. Okay. And I guess, when you think of animal welfare versus, animal rights, Temple Grandin is definitely on the animal welfare side, but more towards kind of what you're describing is making sure that in the traditional animal agriculture situations that we have now, what can we do to make sure that it's a little bit more of a level playing field. But I would say that most of the time those changes are just simply not enough for those that are in the animal welfare industry. Why do you think that is it because the technology hasn't been there, or is it because we feel that what we have right now is enough? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's that's a complicated question. I think there's a lot of ways you can answer that. When it comes to technology, I guess it may be useful to think of an example. When it comes to technology, the thing we're focused on first at Innovate Animal Ag is technologies that can determine the sex of an egg before it hatches. So just to give some background on that technology, in the egg industry right now, there are producers who will produce the hens that end up laying the eggs, and these hatcheries, have no real use for the male chicks because the breeds of chicken that lay eggs are different than the ones that make meat. So there's really no use for the males. What they end up doing is just incubating them, hatching them, and then manually identifying them. There are humans that go in and kind of look at them, determine which ones are male, and then they immediately cull the chicks, usually by maceration. So this is a kind of it's obviously a very wasteful practice and a very unfortunate practice from an animal welfare perspective. And to the egg industry's credit, it's something they've talked about trying to find solutions to and moving away from. But the reason it hasn't happened yet is just because the technology is not there, right? So there have been attempts for the last decade or so to develop technologies that can determine whether an egg is male or female before it hatches, so that you don't have to cull the chicks. But to this point, it's really been kind of a lab scale proof of concept. What I think is really exciting about the space now is that you're starting to see commercialized technologies in Europe that are actually succeeding in the market right now in producing eggs without the use of culling. So you asked why we why we haven't made more progress maybe, and in this particular case, it's just because the technology hasn't been there yet. So I think there's a lot of opportunities in egg sexing and other areas to really change the way that animals are treated and the lives that they have through technology.
Yeah, and let's dig into that a little bit more. I want to step back a little bit and talk about Innovate Animal Ag. And so this is a new nonprofit organization. Is that right?
That's right, a nonprofit.
Great. And are you the only founder? Do you have other team members? What does the kind of founding team look like?
Yeah, so it's just me at this point. We have a great team of volunteers that have been helping. But yeah, I'm the only founder.
You talked about this egg sexing technology, but maybe let's kind of shine light on how the current industry works with male culling, and
Mhm.
maybe even thinking about what the end product is. So the culling of male, I guess, chicks happens for egg production. Is that right?
That's right. Specifically, the production of the layers that lay the eggs. So it's like one step upstream of the of regular eggs.
Oh, I see. Okay, so the and I'll simplify this in my farming
Yeah,
terminology here. But okay, so if we want to have eggs, we're gonna need egg laying hens, and to have egg laying hens, we need to hatch egg laying hens, which are kind of the female chickens, right? And you can't really decide whether it's going to be male or female with current technology. So what ends up happening is that you want to produce egg laying hens. Sometimes it's male, sometimes it's female. Right now, if it's a male, we actually just kill that animal.
that's right.
Can we not kill that animal and turn it into like a chicken that we eat?
Yeah, that's correct. So the genetics for the chickens that end up being broilers, which refers to the chickens that we eat, versus the ones that end up being egg layers, are quite different, and they've been optimized over decades to really be specific to the industry that they're in. So, unfortunately, it's not the case that we can just raise the males for meat because they just aren't as efficient, and it doesn't make economic sense to do so.
Wow. Okay. So it's not only that we're just killing these male chicks, but it's just even if we wanted them to live a little bit longer to turn them into, KFC, they wouldn't be as efficient or let's say even tasty, for example. So we kind of deem them as completely useless.
That's right.
Wow. Okay. And how many of these chickens die every year?
Unfortunately, globally, it's in the billions. I think between 6 and 7 billion every year. In the U.S., you can estimate probably something like 400 million every year of these chicks end up being culled
Just from the male culling, not globally in terms of chicken consumption.
just from the culling. Yeah,
Wow. Okay. And so I guess the in ovo egg sexing technology that you were mentioning earlier allows us to say, hey, any type of, chicks that are going to be born, they're going to be female egg laying hens. Is that right?
that's right. So the incubation period for a layer is about 21 days. And the goal is to be able to identify as early as possible which eggs are going to end up hatching males so that you can basically just destroy the egg and turn it into some other feed product, usually animal feed, and then you don't have to end up killing the chick.
Would you not be able to eat that as like a well, I guess it's a fertilized egg, right?
Yeah, there would be a little embryo inside. I think most people would not really be into that.
I see. Okay. So there is a delicacy for people to eat fertilized eggs, but it's a very, very small amount of the eggs that we consume, I guess.
Yeah.
So it's not that you would like change the makeup of, I guess, what's inside the egg. You would just identify that it's going to be a male or female before it hatches. And so that way you can kind of terminate early.
That is 90% true. There is actually one kind of like crazy technology out there that involves having embryos that are genetically male be born phenotypically female. It's a really wild technology that one interesting company called Seuss is developing. But for the most part, all the commercialized technologies and most of the other technologies involve determining which eggs will end up developing males and then terminating those early.
I see. Okay. And I guess, earlier you were saying that, it could go to feed. Are those chicks that are born and I guess culling is the term for just kind of like, I guess, grinding up a chick? Is that
Yeah. Culling just refers to any time when you have to kill a bunch of animals for because they're not economically productive.
those male kind of chicks that are culled, did those turn into feed?
Yeah, so it ends up going into the same supply chain. The chicks that are cold end up being turned into animal feed, and the eggs that are cold also end up being turned into animal feed.
I see. Okay. So now instead of kind of, allowing them to be born and see the light of day, which is actually very sad if you think about it, born
Mm,
and see the light of the day only to be kind of, slashed with some sort of I've seen the videos. They're very kind of, sad. It's pretty
yeah.
much like making mulch, but instead of a tree going in, it's these baby chicks. So
Mm.
instead of that happening, the eggs are essentially turned into, before they're even hatched, these fertilized eggs that we've identified as male are then turned into, that byproduct, which could be animal feed.
Yeah.
What's the accuracy of this?
It really depends. So maybe we get time to talk about the different types of solutions. But the idea of egg sexing is a goal, and there are many technologies that can achieve that goal, and they have kind of different pros and cons, and are different stages of commercialization. And so it kind of varies how accurate you can be based on what technology you're using. For the most part, the commercialized technologies are aiming to have like a 90% plus accuracy, 95% plus. If I remember correctly, the accuracy for manual sexing, which is what happens now, is like 98%. So yeah, you can get pretty accurate with a lot of these technologies.
Okay, I see. And I guess this is going to sound like a very backwards question, but
Mm.
are there any for the egg producers, or maybe even this kind of feed byproduct producers, are there any benefits of the feed from the culled male chicks than the, I guess, just the unhatched fertilized eggs?
I'm not aware of any. It's possible.
I see. Okay. To me, it actually sounds like it would be much, more things to filter through, or maybe, lower quality feed, because you might have beaks and legs and all this other stuff in
Yeah.
there too.
Yeah, it's possible. I mean, I know probably in both cases they go through a significant amount of processing. So
So then, these technologies are available now, and you said some even on a commercial scale. Is that right?
hmm, that's right. Yeah, I think actually the rollout of this technology is going a lot better than a lot of people realize. I think it's interesting in the food industry, you're used to thinking, and especially, meat and alternative proteins, you're thinking about scales that are just like kind of unfathomably huge. And so like you can be producing a lot of alternative protein and really not be making much of a dent in the overall market. But with, first of all, eggs are a smaller market. And then the layers of the eggs are one step upstream. And given that each hen lays, 300 to 500 eggs over the course of her life, the kind of scalability is maybe a tick less than we're used to thinking about. So, based on the models that I've developed for Innovate Animal Ag, I'd estimate that between the 10 to 20% of the total EU market is already using this technology to produce the hen. So, which I think is, higher than most people kind of realize. And I think it's going much better than most people realize.
Who are the producers of this technology right now? And are they, and what is it? Is it a machine that identifies, and what is the technology that identifies?
So there are kind of like two broad classes, I would say, of technologies that are working in the market right now, each with kind of various pros and cons. The kind of like first and largest class of technology is kind of like imaging technology. So basically, there's a company called Agriat, I think, and basically they will use hyperspectral imaging to basically take a picture where they can see through the shell of the egg effectively to determine whether the embryo is male or female. This is kind of the first technology to be developed. I think it's functioning in 7 hatcheries in Europe right now. And there's another company called Orbim that has a similar technology using MRI to image the eggs. So that's one class of technology. The other class is what I call allantoic sampling. And basically, that just refers to putting a small hole in the shell of the egg, extracting a sample of fluid, and then running some sort of analysis on that fluid to determine whether the egg is male or female. These solutions, generally work early on into incubation. They tend to be a little bit more expensive, and they're kind of a little bit newer, and so maybe more have more room for optimization. Further than that, there are a number of other technologies that are kind of being developed but aren't in market yet.
Thinking about that personally, if I was to eat, I guess, an egg from one of these egg laying hens, I would definitely prefer the biopsy approach than the MRI or imaging approach, because
Hmm.
it just sounds like there could be, I don't know, when you hear MRIs or CT scans, for example, there's a lot of unwanted radiation.
Oh,
Um,
interesting.
yeah, so that's interesting. So then, okay, so how is Innovate Animal Ag, and can I abbreviate as IAA?
Sure.
Yeah, great. So how is IAA promoting these technologies, and kind of what is your main focus area for getting all egg laying hen producers, I guess I should say, or egg producers, to use this technology?
Yeah. So our main goal is to help bring this technology over to the U.S. I don't think we've talked about it yet. The reason why technologies are concentrated in Europe right now is because the governments in Europe, led by the German government, have started to ban the practice of chick culling, which has caused this explosion of development for this technology. But no eggs made in this way are currently available in the U.S. So that's our goal. And the way we're trying to accomplish this is, as we talk to a lot of these companies, I think there's a lot of interest in the U.S. market. U.S. is one of the top producers and consumers of eggs, but there's like just not a lot of bandwidth to really pursue conversations with U.S. producers. So basically, our goal is to start laying the groundwork in the U.S. for the rollout of this technology ahead of time. For example, one thing we would like to do is really engage with the high end of the U.S. egg industry, the organic, free range, cage free producers, and just gather a group of producers that would be excited about carrying their first eggs without the use of culling outside of Europe. I think this is a great way for egg producers to kind of differentiate, elevate their brand, like I was saying before, and really talk about the ways in which they're making sure that animals are being treated well. So, like when a technology company is ready to have conversations with the U.S. hatchery, for example, we can come to the table with a fully built supply chain that includes, the egg producer, the distributor, the retailer, and say, look, here we have the demand piece taken care of. All you have to do is figure out how to get the technology into the hatchery. So, really engaging with the industry in that way is something we're focused a lot on. Secondly, I think that there's just a lot of basic research and basic work that can be done. Again, coming from the alternative protein space where there's so much interest and so much attention, it kind of took some getting used to for me. But one very obvious thing is that there have been no studies to date on American consumer attitudes towards this technology and the practice of culling, because it hasn't really been a thing. So that's just like a very simple, low hanging fruit. I think that Innovate Animal Ag can really help with kind of demonstrating with data that this is something consumers will care about. People will be willing to pay a price premium for eggs made in this way, and using that to again facilitate these partnership conversations between technology companies and hatcheries.
Going back to banning the practice of chick culling in Europe, is that, was that type of, I guess, regulation set forth knowing that this technology existed, or, what would be the alternative to not, killing these male chicks if there's no other, I guess, food or business use for them?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, the reason that the practice was banned in Germany, I think fundamentally was because people were against it. There are polls of German consumers, and the practice of culling is overwhelmingly unpopular over there. So I think that's kind of the fundamental reason. I do think when the practice was banned, the technology was much more nascent. But I think once the German government, to its credit, gave the industry a few years to figure out what to do about this, and they were able to come up with these solutions and start rolling them out. So I think the kind of regulatory action really spurred innovation, which is kind of an interesting phenomenon. Also, we talked about earlier how the genetics for layers and broilers are different, but that's not always the case. There are certain breeds that can do both. They are kind of less efficient in both regards. So I think the sexing are longer term are the preferable method, but companies can kind of fall back on these dual purpose breeds, or just raising the males for meat and then maybe taking an economic loss on them. There are other kind of suboptimal options.
I see. Okay. And I guess I'll give you a little bit of a hard time on this one, but when I
Mhm.
think of, I guess, free range organic farm, I think of like a small farm that ends up going to a farmer's market. Now, many times this is definitely not the case. These are still very mass produced.
Mhm.
Even free range organic could still be a very mass produced operation. So I could see where going after these larger farms makes sense. But I guess if I think of that small farm or farmers market type of seller, they probably don't want to bring any additional, technology to the table. So I guess you're going after the bigger farms that are charging the premium. Is that right?
The hatcheries where this technology would be implemented and where the culling actually happens is one step upstream of the farmers who have the chickens that lay the eggs.
I
Um,
see. Okay.
a lot of times actually the kind of high end egg producers will be buying the same chicks as the commodity egg producers, and then the additional cost is kind of comes from the welfare accommodations that they have on their farm, but ultimately they're coming from the same commercial hatchery,
I
because
see.
there's the genetics industry is very concentrated. There's only a couple companies that have commercially viable layer uh, chicken lines.
I see. Okay, yeah, and this totally makes sense. I guess it would be kind of like organic vegetable farmer buying seeds that are,
Exactly.
certified organic. In this case, that small farm, which already charges a premium, can say, "Hey, I want eggs from your line of the, in ovo, egg sexing that doesn't have the male culling aspect to it." And then, that's where they would get it from. Maybe a little bit more expensive, but that price can be, justified with the whole organic aspect. Yeah, that definitely makes sense.
Exactly. Yeah, and I should also just to point out that the price impact on eggs in Europe has been relatively modest. I would say, you'll see a price increase of 1 to 3 cents per euro cents per egg, which is comparable, if not slightly lower than cage free. And consumers have shown that they are very willing to pay a price premium for cage free. So I think something similar will hold with this technology, where although it will be an additional cost for the egg producer and the retailer, the cost will eventually just be passed on to the consumer. And
Interesting.
then,
Yeah.
yeah, one more important point is that I think that one lesson that was really kind of like etched into my brain from working on cultivated meat is this idea of starting at the high end of the market and then coming down market over time, right? This is like what happens with all alternative proteins. So I think that, like, because this technology is very new, it's only been around for a couple of years. It's still more expensive and has a lower accuracy than the manual option. But I think longer term, as the technology becomes more developed, there's room for optimization, scaling, those sorts of things will go away. So I think getting initial foothold in the kind of like organic free range market will allow these producers or these technology companies to really start scaling out their technology and bring down costs of the time, so that it can be a much more ubiquitous thing in the future. That's an important part of the strategy.
Yeah, and I guess so. My mother-in-law is actually sells eggs in Europe,
No way.
and yeah, they're organic, free range, the customers definitely do play a premium, and I think they have no problem paying a little bit more, at least from what I know, um,
Mhm.
for this type of high quality product versus just going to the grocery store and buying eggs there. So I think that definitely makes sense.
What country does your
Germany.
mother-in-law? So she must be. She must have some. Do you know whether she's using the technology for her eggs?
I don't, but I will ask.
You should ask. Yeah,
I'll ask and I'll put that into the show notes.
yeah, because the German ban is actually already in effect. So eggs are either using this technology, or they are using these dual-purpose breeds, or they're rearing the hens rearing the males for meat.
Well, unrelated to the increased price of eggs here in the US, I do know that egg prices have been, also going up in Europe.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, that's super interesting. And so you said that there's just a few companies that are producing these, kind of like going back to the organic seeds example. There's only, so many places you can get, certified organic, seeds for certain things. How many of these companies are there, and what are some of them called?
Yeah, so we have. I'll just do a quick plug. We have a full market snapshot on the Innovate Animal Ag blog, and kind of goes into detail on different technologies, where they are, what the pros and cons are. But as far as like publicly announced partnerships, there are 5 companies now with commercialized solutions. The two I mentioned earlier, Orbem with the MRI technology, and then Agri Advanced Technologies with the hyperspectral imaging technology. And then there are 3 with these sapling based solutions, and their names are PlantEgg, InOvo, and um, Select, and Select being spelled with EGGT as opposed to ECT.
Okay, cool. And I was just looking at the Innovate Animal Ag website, and that's at animalinnovation.org, and we'll put that link in the show notes. Okay, so this has been super fascinating. I have a great understanding of why this technology is important. I have a great understanding as to why this technology has been banned in Europe, in Germany, for example, and what Innovate Animal Ag is really doing here in the U.S. I wanted to ask you, for our listeners, anybody who's interested, what's the best way to get involved?
Yeah, great question. So I'll first say that Innovate Animal Ag is a very new organization. So I would say pretty much we need help with just about everything. So if you have if there's some way you think you can help, I would definitely very happy to talk to folks. Please reach out. Very excited to meet other folks who are excited about the idea of using technology to help improve agricultural practices. I will say that our kind of two big bottlenecks right now are fundraising and hiring. So, if you're excited about this approach, donations are very much appreciated. We're also hiring a number of roles, which you can see on our website, especially roles focused on corporate engagement and communications, because that's really, I think, what will help the Innovo egg sexing work in the U.S. Also, would love to work with volunteers who are excited about what we're doing. For that, please feel free to reach out.
Great. And are you or will you be registered as 501c3 status?
We don't currently have 501c3 status, but if you make a donation this year and then we get our 501c3 status this year, which I am very confident that we will, then your donation will be retroactively tax deductible. So for practical purposes, it will be tax deductible, but I can't promise that for sure.
Okay, great. And I guess, the regulation has passed in Europe. Is there any kind of new legislation that will potentially ban the male culling here in the US, or anything that we can do to speed up that process as US citizens?
It's interesting. I think that these sort of things happen differently in different countries. I think the governments in Europe certainly have a different mindset towards this than the U.S. government does. There have been various regulatory actions in the U.S. around egg production. Most notably bans on the production of eggs from caged systems in favor of cage-free systems. I don't think there's any active proposals to target the practice of culling. And in my opinion, it's unlikely that would happen absent of there being kind of like a natural uptake in the market. When cage bans went into effect, there were obviously producers in the U.S. that could produce eggs, cage-free eggs, and I think that was part of the rationale was that producers had other options. But in this case, it's not. Producers would not have other options. So I think given the way the U.S. is structured, I think most likely the first step is to start introducing the technology into the high end of the market via just like natural market mechanisms, and then going from there.
Okay, excellent. Well, Robert, thank you so much. I've definitely learned a lot about this kind of interesting technology. Thanks so much for being a guest on the Future Food Show.
I really appreciate you having me on.
This is your host, Alex, and we look forward to seeing you on our next episode.